In this episode of the Baby Sleep Connection podcast, I'm interviewing local Niagara internationally board certified lactation consultant, Karla Masse. I wanted to touch on one of the threads that we talked about in the episode, and it's important to talk about because I want to make sure that it's clear for those of you who are navigating some challenging feeding situations with your baby. These are high stakes situations when your baby is not growing and thriving. It can be very anxiety provoking, very worrying and stressful. And when we're talking in the episode about, ignore the advice and set it aside, we're of course not talking about ignoring healthcare advice. In this day and age where we have social media channels and friends and family all piling on a whole bunch of conflicting advice on what to do, we can feel like it's almost like we're in quicksand. With the quicksand is all this advice that's piling on, and we don't know which route to follow. We, of course, can get a lot of differing opinions from our own healthcare providers, too. And I think that's a really challenging situation as we navigate decisions as parents. So, what I would suggest if you're in that situation, in a high anxiety situation where the decision making is difficult because of conflicting information, take all the noise that is not useful and supportive to you and set that aside and focus on the healthcare providers that you trust so that you can navigate the situation by asking questions, by sharing your concerns and your worries so that you can come to a decision that is best for you and your baby. With that said, I would also like to add that if you enjoyed this episode or you follow Karla Masse on social media and her approach resonates with you and you are in Niagara, share this with someone who is expecting a baby in the next little bit. Karla is one of our 5 speakers at the Beyond Birth Niagara Prenatal Retreat on November 3rd. She'll be talking about the golden rules of infant feeding. She has a lovely manner, very calm and reassuring, and I'm excited that she's a part of this retreat. If you're wanting to learn more about the retreat, you can find out all the information at familysleep.ca/retreat. Now, having taken care of those 2 points of business, let's dive into this next episode and enjoy. Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello and welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection podcast. I'm your host, Heather Boyd, and I'm excited to have a guest on today. My guest is Karla Masse. She is an internationally board certified lactation consultant, and we are going to do a lot of chatting today about feeding babies. Karla, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Heather.
It's a pleasure to have you on. I wonder if you can share with us what it is that you do and how you came to be what you're doing now with serving families.
So I'm the owner of Be With Baby, and it's basically feeding support is the work that I'm doing. So I'm helping families with breastfeeding, bottle feeding, pumping, and just, all feeding stuff kind of related to, in terms of me being an IBCLC. So that's kind of what I'm doing for my business. And basically, I think the inspiration came, ever since I was a young kid. People would say, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I would always say something along the lines of working with babies, and the answers would vary here and there, but generally it was always something to do with babies. So it's always been a really deep interest of mine. And then I had my own kids, and that's when I was really starting to realize that my passion was in learning how to help people feed their babies, and just kind of seeing the need that our own community had for it kind of brought me to where I am today, almost 10 years later of studying and, exams and all that. That's kind of how I got my spark for it, was just, when I became a mom myself, and, I had struggles of my own, and that kind of got me started on, okay, well, what can I do? What's it called? And then what's a lactation consultant, and that's kind of where it all just started the ball rolling for me. And here I am today talking to Heather, Heather Boyd, my dream come true, literally.
Well, and
So
I have to fill people in on how we know each other because although we're working in the same area, supporting the same families, like geographic area too, we're both in Niagara, both working with babies and families, both supporting them. We're both moms. We met at the Y ages ago when our babies were almost too young to participate in programs without us. And we were bumping into each other at the Y when our kiddos were in programs. And it's hard to believe because just back then, I remember you saying, I'm starting or contemplating going into be a lactation consultant. And I remember feeling so excited for you because your whole manner and your whole empathetic nature, I thought, oh, the families that you're going to get to serve once you're through your training are going to be so fortunate. So it's fun to have known you through our kids and through our parenting roles. And then now we're getting to touch base with each other professionally too.
yes, it's so amazing thinking back to that moment when I first kind of like, ooh, that's Heather Boyd right there. I'm gonna go say hi and like introducing myself to you on this, even just kind of this interesting perspective for myself was back then I looked up to you so much professionally, as a parent. And so a lot of my parenting strategies and stuff that I kind of use as my foundation came from stuff I learned from you and the information you are giving into the world. So, and I remember thinking, I want to be like that one day. I want to be giving this beautiful information to the world.
And
Yeah.
so often, I think the overwhelm of parenting in the early years, the families so desperately need people that are not just doing the technical. And we're going to talk a little bit about the technical side of feeding and the problems and challenges that you see. But that whole layer of connecting with parents to support them in this amazing and incredible shift that they're going through. You and I have both gone through that shift as parents ourselves, but I wonder, like, fold that piece in for me, this idea of it's not just lactation consulting. What are those other layers you put in that are so, in my view, so valuable to supporting families at this stage?
Oh, it's so cool. When I first kind of started my business all kind of on my own and going out into the community, I was like, what are you so passionate about that you want to ingrain and just include in your approach? And so for me, that foundation starts with, the whole thing of attachment theory and just really diving in deep to how we can connect with our babies on this very biological level. And that was for me something that I've always, and I like how you kind of said it, folded that into the information I provide for families. So, we're talking about feeding babies, but there's so much more to feeding a baby that requires that parent's care, like us caring for the parent and being able to provide, strategies for their own environment. And that can sometimes take root in a lot of what my foundation is kind of focusing in on. So, yeah, and that's just something that over the years I would kind of be doing something and I would say, well, should I, how long should I be wearing my baby in this baby carrier for? And I would look it up online and, oh, I came across this person and they say that this is called attachment, parenting. And I would learn these things as I was parenting my own baby. So, now that's what I really like to include because I can feel that there's such this beautiful connection that we can have for ourselves and for our babies. And I see how well it can work for so many families. So incorporating it is extremely it's just right all buried into the information that I'm giving people. And yeah, that's been something that's really important to me.
Yeah, I hadn't realized both of us didn't really discover attachment parenting or that approach to parenting until we were mothers. I hadn't realized that that was the same for you. I had done so much reading and discovering in that first year, especially. And, I know a recent post of yours really resonated with me. And I would love to, unpack this one a little bit more. And you picked up on it a little bit in your last comment. And it was this idea of the questioning and feeling uncertain about some of the things that end up being so supportive to the relationship between a parent and their baby, which also feeds, no pun intended, feeds right back into making feeding a smoother process or sleep. And you were talking about it on your Instagram as being a parenting rut. And I think that rut comes when we're just not sure whether we're doing it right, how much we're supposed to baby wear, for example. And the ruts that you talked about that impacted you as a young mother when your babies were much younger than they are now was the sleep piece and the feeding piece and how much to carry our babies and whether to bed share or not. I wonder if you can unpack that whole idea of the parenting rut when it comes to all these the details we're not even aware of before we become parents.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I can, and even as a mom now, like my youngest is 6.5, I still find myself in these little ruts where it's so cool because we think of a rut as being this low period or this time where we're feeling maybe a little lost or we're not sure, if we're doing the right thing. And it can feel kind of scary a little bit and you're just in this very vulnerable point in your parenting journey where you just for me anyway, I mean, I would get into those ruts and I can almost put them on each of my fingers to say, this was the moment I realized being in a rut can be so powerful and magical. You're in this rut, but you are literally just saying to yourself, I need answers, I need help here, I need information, but we didn't realize that we have it. Like it's in us. It's the choices that we're making are fueled by that intuition that we have. And what resonates with us so well as parents is that we can get these feelings of what feels good and what doesn't feel good for when we're parenting, right? So being in a rut is, yeah, it's if you really flip it and think, take a break, take a step back, let's look at the big picture here. What's working well? What resonates and makes me feel really good as a mom? And what seems to make my baby and my child feel good as well? And it's magical. Like literally, if you were sitting there going, well, the thing that I read said to do this, this, and this, and it's just not working. And so you turn around and you say, you know what? I'm not doing any of that. I'm going to do the thing that works for me and for my baby and what feels good. And it's incredible. You just go from feeling so defeated or feeling lost in the journey to feeling so empowered and just feeling like you have the answers. Like you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't need to overthink this. It's right here in front of me. My baby's been telling me all along. Or, I've been getting these small little messages that this is just not working. And it put me in this little rut just to give me this reminder that here it's dark right here, but guess what? It's gonna be bright. The light is gonna shine because you're
Oh,
gonna start
amazing.
doing the things that feel good. So that's the ruts are always gonna happen, but embrace them and just realize that's where the magic starts to unfold. It's like the dark to the light. So
I love that. Well, and as you were talking, I was writing down the word empowerment, and then you said it's so empowering. And this idea that you've got the answers in you. And I think about the clients that I work with, and I know that although every family is different, this theme of uncertainty and fear and not having a clue, feeling like you just don't know what you're doing and that you're going to really mess it up. That idea of, and you can't see my face, but the smile I have on my face when you describe the magic of being in a hard place and then not knowing where to turn and then realizing you actually do have the resources in you. That's just powerful. And it's not to say we need to do it alone, because certainly I see your role and my role and others working with families with babies as putting that mirror in front of parents to see that they don't need to get it all from us. We're the guide. We may have some of the knowledge that they need, but they have so much more in them and they know their babies better than anybody else.
yes, and you said it so well. And just being there, it's not to say we want anyone to do anything alone, but reach out and find those guides in your life, right? There's always going to be someone who's helping you and guiding you, which is incredible. that's so important to have. And that's what I would always kind of look at your page when I was a mom, a young mom, like raising my babies, and I would just read things that you posted, and it guided me so beautifully in my journey because it fit so well with what I believed in and what worked well for us. So reaching out to those people in our community to help us is so empowering, and it's amazing to have, people who we can connect other family, connect families to other people that we know in the community too, because oftentimes it's like it's a group effort. So
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, it goes back to that it feels overused sometimes to say it takes a village, but it really does. And when there are community support people that can work through that same lens, then there's this beautiful overlap between services that allow families to get the support they need. I think too about this idea of the empowerment piece and how sometimes the knowledge, if you're having challenges with feeding your baby, you need some of the knowledge and you need a problem solver. But there's that empowerment piece means that you're not solely relying on them to give you all the answers to the point where you cannot do this without them, that every answer has to come from them. And I think and I'm going way back to when I started as an OT, is what you're saying reminds me of what my very first amazing boss told me. And she said, from the very beginning of your work with families, your job is to get them to a point where they don't need you. That doesn't mean they won't be able to come to you for support when they are looking for that, but for us to be able to give them enough of the confidence and empowerment that they know they have the answers in front of them, and to have that be something that is the goal for them to have what they need from you so that they can carry on their own in ways that you and I, they're going to come up with something new that works best for their family, that is beyond what we could even come up with for them, because we don't know them as well as they know themselves.
yes, I love that. Just giving people those tools to put in their tool belt, right? Yeah, it goes
Now,
a very,
you
very long way.
you have 6 children, so you've gone through a lot of different feeding experiences because every kiddo is different. I wonder if because you had your own struggles with feeding. Do you want to share some of what that looked like for you and what got you through the challenges?
Oh, wow. So if I look back to my one feeding journey, it was probably the one that really took root in me in terms of the need for support and the need for good information, because that journey for me it started out so like hard. Like it was hard to feed my baby. I was scared to feed my baby. It hurt so much. And I was sick within the first, couple weeks of her being born. And I was mastitis, all the stuff. And just, I wanted to feed my baby, but it hurt and I was so scared. So who was out there that was going to help me? And I'd go to the doctor. This hurts. This is hard. I feel like I'm just feeding all day long. And, what can I do? Well, how about you give a bottle, like maybe give a bottle of formula? Well, I didn't want to. I wanted to feed my baby. I'm not saying that that is something that other people would 100% want to choose that. And, they do. And I love that for people because they're making their own choices. But for me, I just said, like, I feel like there should be more. Like, I want more help with this. Why is the latch hurting? Like, how can I make this latch better? I don't want to give the bottle. I want to make the latch better? So finding support was so hard. And this was 14 years ago, but I mean, not that long ago. And so then I started digging deeper. I would say, okay, I need to find someone to help me with breastfeeding. So I would look them up and I went to see a couple people. I had to drive my new baby to, you know, Niagara Falls. So it's like 20, 30 minutes for me to get there. My baby cried the whole entire car ride. So I was very stressed about that and, couldn't leave the house because I knew baby was going to cry the whole way, but I needed help. So that was something that I have always kind of kept, deep down inside saying, okay, this is not how we should be parenting our babies. We're looking for support, and now we have to drive, and it's just this big thing. So this little one, I did keep feeding, and I never really got answers, but we fed for a very long time, and every single latch hurt. Every single feed hurt the whole time. And I'm not saying that people should do this. Like we should not be feeding babies and it hurting us. But this was how determined I kind of felt, that I also didn't know how else to feed her. So I would just do it through pain every single time. And yeah, I had my next little one, and that little one latched on and I didn't even feel it. And I thought, wow, that was so different. This is how feeding is supposed to feel. It's not supposed to hurt every time. So anyway, that was my big story. And that's kind of in, my journey. That was the biggest point of my kind of, you know, what am I going to do for moms? How can I help moms? And it was starting to take root in my process of coming to where I am today. Now I'm coming to your house to help you feed your baby, and I've got answers. So yeah, it's definitely something that was a very hard time for me. And I do like to mention that even if we have the support of that one person in our lives who's cheering us on, or just we know we can lean on them when we have, when we need to cry or we need to talk about it. That I feel like is something that is super important. And I was able to have that with my husband. He was very supportive and, was always there for me to lean on if I needed to cry and talk about it and stuff like that. And so, yeah, so that's another big piece of being able to work through these difficult times, is that we do have the support of just that one person. And sometimes I feel like if I can be that one person for somebody, then how incredible is that, to get them from point A to point B with a little bit of extra support, then it's something that I also feel very strongly about.
Well, and I would love to talk a little bit more about the home visit piece. Way back when I started as an OT, I think for the first decade of my work, I did home visits with families with babies from 0 to 3. And so I know what that feels like as a professional. You know how much it would have been of value to you with your first one when you had them in the car driving for support with a baby crying the whole way to Niagara Falls. What is, tell me about the magic, because I know there's magic in these home visits, the magic of doing home visits. And then I have a part two to that as well, because I know there's the flip side of that for families too.
So the magic of the home visits is basically I'm just bringing everything to you and to your home, and we're in your familiar environment and you can be comfortable. I show up. I don't care what the house looks like. I don't care what you're wearing, when you showered last. None of that is, I'm not looking at any of that. And I feel like I kind of is starting to say this more and more to people. They'll say, I'm sorry about my house, whatever, whatever. And I'll say, to be really honest with you, when I come here, I see a mama and a baby, and that's what I'm here for. When I go home, I see the messes. I see the mess there, here, and everywhere. And like, so it's different when you're in someone else's environment. For me, I'm here to help with feeding, and I'm super passionate about that. So my brain is going like a million miles an hour thinking, okay, how can we best support this family, right? Like, what are we going to do next in our visit? So those visits are super, super comprehensive, and we look at every single thing, any questions that might pop up. We find positions that work well for you and the baby. So we look at every aspect of feeding, and sometimes we take it really slow because I'm going into people's homes not really knowing their whole story. So some of my visit is listening to your story and sitting there holding space for those hard times that you might have been experiencing up until the point where we met. So a lot of a home visit is, yes, I'm very focused on making sure we simplify feeding for the family, but at the same time, there's many, many other variables involved. I'm bringing my scale, so we're also weighing the baby. lots of stuff's happening at those home visits. But the nice part is that I'm coming to you and you are resting, which is what we want for a new mom to do. So,
That's wonderful. Well, and you picked up on that earlier thread too of there's the technical side, the actual mechanics of feeding and getting enough calories in and gaining weight, but that whole other side that impacts everything is that emotional wellness and feeling heard and stress and the impact that that has on the relationship, on feeding itself. And I just think, yeah, the magic of that connection when you have a provider who is supporting you on more than just the technical side. I think that's amazing. I wonder too, when you do see families, you are likely seeing some trends in what are common challenges that come up with feeding. What do you tend to see most frequently when you're supporting families in terms of the challenge?
oh, I think probably my top five reasons for visiting a family would be number one, I think is nipple pain. So
Mm-hmm.
painful latch, low milk supply, low weight gain for their baby. Maybe a baby is really gassy, really fussy, and then oftentimes I'll hear parents say my baby's spitting up a lot. And the common challenges are usually rooted in either the mother or the baby's experience. So if the mother's experiencing nipple pain, her milk supply is, we're working on that, or the baby, where the baby's, fussy, gassy, spitting up, really uncomfortable, not gaining weight well. So there's kind of those two kind of pictures that we're also now needing to combine and to see how we can best get everybody working well together. But the common challenges are definitely, there's definitely a trend with that. And oftentimes I do to kind of let people know I help with bottle feeding too. So, if your baby's not latching on your body, they still need to feed, and there are ways that we can kind of work with babies to make sure that we are reaching that baby's full potential so that their feeding is very efficient and they are comfortable and that's going well. So the common challenges are mostly related to, the milk supply and the nipple pain or fussy babies. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Well,
so that's
and
kind
this
of,
it may just be my impression when I think way back and when I accessed a lactation consultant too. And yes, it took till the third baby before I decided that, wait a second, maybe it doesn't have to be this painful. But is it relatively new, this kind of, I'll say, merging or more holistic overlap between supporting all methods of feeding?
that's a good question, Heather. I think it's kind of been something that for me, when I meet a family, I want to help them with whatever their feeding goals are or whatever they're feeding. Like, if I feel there's a lot more information out there, and if looking back 15 years ago, I think I only really knew like what one type of pump looked like, and now there's so many out there. And I think like with families having access to social media and I'm not really sure. I don't know if bottle feeding has always been something that maybe it was under the assumption that we couldn't help with it, but it's definitely something that is super important, and not every bottle out there is going to achieve that for a baby, but it's definitely something that I think is important because babies who feed from bottles can experience a lot of discomfort, and that's not fair for those little babies. So we should be, getting to the root cause of it anyway and seeing why that's happening regardless of the method. So
Well, and it's reminding me way back when, 20 years ago when I was covering for an OT in the NICU, there were no lactation consultants in the NICU. There are now, thankfully, because as nice of an asset as it is to have an OT looking at positioning and latch, I think, oh my goodness, the specific training that you get on that is just worth so much more. And I realize that's in hospital, but the same challenges that a parent is going to have in the hospital can carry over to home too. I'm wondering too, I'm curious about the idea of parents having a goal or a vision in mind of what feeding is going to look like, or setting their sights on having the goal of exclusively breastfeeding, for example, versus feeding expectations, pinning your full expectation on what it's going to look like. How do you support parents when it doesn't go the way that they expect? And how do you support them in creating a goal that they can move towards with your support?
Well, if I meet a family who, usually on my intake form, I'll say, what are your feeding goals? And if it says one thing, like exclusive breastfeeding or, breastfeeding or exclusive pumping, something like that. Usually when I go and meet the family, we take a really, really big deep dive. Everything is just kind of like taken into consideration because sometimes our expectations are met with these really difficult challenges, and those challenges can really take a toll on some families that I'm seeing. So, being able to kind of put into perspective what we can kind of work with. So, what type of feeding we're going to be doing and how the plan is going to look. I try to kind of come from a place of simplicity because the more simple we can make feeding, the better it is for everyone. So, however that's going to look for each family is going to be very different from, the next. So, basically we're meeting goals and we're getting those deep dives into the history of everything because sometimes we have you know, a personal plan, and then we have all these other variables that can impact that personal plan. And those variables can be very different for each person because, we really do look at each person and each baby, and every single person I have ever met, every single baby I've ever met is so unique, right? Like we have like unique fingerprints. That's how people are. Every situation is so variable and so different, and there's different things that can, change it up for that family. So, what's the goal here, and how are we going to get there? And, is this realistic too? And so, I'll meet a family who has this idea that they want to exclusively breastfeed their baby, and now the baby has started to lose weight, and now we need to look and see what's going on here. So, we sit down and we talk about it. We're going to see what's going on here and how can we improve things for the mom and for the babies to see if this will also improve the feeding experience. So if we have a parent sitting beside me and I'm saying, okay, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of mamas or parents feeding their babies, and I can tell you right now that I will never be able to predict or determine how much milk a person's going to make. So, it's like that alone is so powerful, knowing that sometimes this whole thing is just not in our control. There's other variables at play here. So, the milk supply thing can be, I think, something that creates some pretty intense challenges for families. We can have milk supply because our bodies are able, and then we have this other issue where maybe our body's not going to be able to have this full entire milk supply. So, we look at those variables there too. But having this opportunity to have a discussion and say, like, we won't know until we know what's happening, right? And if I meet a family a couple months into their journey, was the journey being managed, with this proper information? And sometimes journeys they start off a little rocky. So if we can get to the root of that and figure out how we can start to see improvements. So there's a lot of like just so much I could keep talking about when it comes to feeding goals versus those expectations, because there's some plans that are going to be a little bit more challenging than others. The goal is that we're going to do these things. They're kind of temporary to see if they're going to help boost the situation. So if, we can kind of put it into perspective that a lot of what we're doing is temporary to meet that final goal, right? Like that goal of like, okay, is how are we going to manage feeding for this dyad and what's that going to look like for them? So yeah, I don't know if that really answered the question, but there's so many options to talk about when it comes to the variations of challenges. So
Yeah, I feel what comes to me when you're talking is that you don't know what you don't know until you know it, and you can't know till you try. And so trying, that's the impression I get, is that because every path is so different, that it really is exploring what's going to work for this family with this baby under these circumstances, which has never existed before in those combinations and uniqueness that every family has. I imagine the intense feelings of grief when a family has a particular expectation and it's not going the way that they planned, and that grief is really part of the journey too, moving through to something that where you can set goals that move you towards the ultimate goal, which includes parenting the baby in front of you with the body that you have.
exactly. So very well said, Heather. Yeah, like being able to just, sit down and talk about this, what's happening here right now, and just not think of all the other stuff, that we're seeing and the ads online and the, that our friend is, having this experience and we're having this experience. It's going to be different. And yeah, just being
Mm.
able to meet those families where they're at is an incredibly, incredibly important piece of the work I'm doing, is just being there when those families are, they've just kind of reached out to me and I'm the last little part of the string that's holding everything together, right? And they're crying and it's just, you have these really difficult situations that, if we can start to add in these small pieces, we can start to see people light up again, and
Mm.
they realize that, okay, this is our journey's taking a turn. We're turning a corner and we're doing something different. And little by little, we start to see, people start to feel good about their feeding journey, because it's, it can be really hard. It's just kind of part of I talked about my journey that was hard, and I look back on it and I feel like it's something that I experienced that was hard, but I got through it. I did that. I'm like, damn, you're good. You're a tough girl, like, and I'm not saying we all should be these tough people, like, walking the earth, but it just gives us this new confidence almost for
Mm.
what we're doing too, like we can get through
Mm.
the hard times, then we can come out on the other side and feel, happy with ourselves because we did what we could. And like that's so huge, right? Our effort and our, just our attitude can make a big difference. So,
Well, and it's that toughness, right? That resilience of getting through something hard isn't always about, the grit or working hard or muscling through, but that the challenge of getting through with determination by letting go in a lot of ways, letting go of what you thought it would look like. And sure, that's not just breastfeeding and feeding our babies either. That's like parenting with everything when those expectations, that we have of parenting end up being very different. The reality is a lot messier in all the ways possible. And the letting go piece of what it was supposed to look like in your mind's eye to the reality of it, and feeling proud that you can get through that way in a not, bearing down and tolerating challenges or muscling your way through, but in that release of letting go of the expectations so that you can find, I don't know if you used the word joy. Well, you did. I think you said feeling good about the feeding journey. And I
yeah,
always look at that as finding the joy in that and the pride that we can have in getting through something really hard.
exactly. And just you know that there's going to be hard times, and it's just like that mindset can be incredibly helpful. Like, and I think you kind of touched a little bit on what I was my whole point of when I was rambling on there, but it's just letting go of, sometimes we just literally need to let go of what we are trying to, you know, push through or create for ourselves and see what happens and just let things kind of let the whole situation lead the way and embrace it as it's unfolding because otherwise if we're trying to change things that aren't meant to be changed or cannot be changed, that's going to take a really, really harsh toll on the whole situation.
Mhm. Oh, what comes to mind as you say that, Carla, is working to create something that fits with the way your family works versus controlling. Creating versus controlling. And it's the controlling piece when we realize, and this is such a theme with my families when we're working through sleep too, is all the things that we think we're in control of as parents, which includes the feeding with our baby and how well what it's going to look like, and realizing, oh, there is so much less that we have control over than we thought, but we can create a path that moves us towards something that looks really beautiful for our family. Messy and sticky, yes, but beautiful too.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious to ask you about I think it's a hot button topic because there's so much conflicting information out there, and that is the whole conversation around tongue ties. Wonder if you can give us your sense of how that's playing out in the dynamic on feeding, how often it's an issue and how disruptive that is to feeding, and then how you guide families to address it.
This topic, Heather, I could talk about for like hours and hours and hours.
We
Um,
should do an episode just on tongue
just on,
tie.
oh my gosh. When I kind of first started on my own, I came from a very like incredible group of colleagues who are super smart, very passionate and dedicated to finding ways that are, I don't know, like just so good. So the information that I learned before I became like on my own here with Be with Baby has brought me into this. I have this outlook on navigating journeys, feeding journeys, when it comes to difficulties and challenges. And so that is also something that for me, I'm also navigating a situation where there could be tongue tie, it it's coming from this big, huge learning journey that I've been on and being able to see how we approach this tongue tie situation can be incredibly impactful if we are coming at it from this planned perspective. So sometimes for me, I'm seeing all areas of the spectrum when it comes to tongue ties. I'm seeing the darker side of it that, breaks my heart and I cry when I talk about it. But then I see this other side of it that's like, oh my gosh, look at all this work we're doing and all this thinking and all this intellectualizing of this baby and their story, and look how beautiful the outcome is. So I see this really
Mhm.
big, like you said, Heather, it is a controversial type of a topic because there's so much information out there, and we don't have this beautiful guideline, this beautiful sparkly book that says, okay, step one, we have a tongue tie. Step two, here's what we should be doing, right?
Mhm.
Like, and everybody has their own book, and some are really sparkly and some aren't very sparkly at all. So I
Mhm.
like to kind of come at it from this very integrative perspective where I look at the tongue as being incredibly like just dynamic, right? Like it's one of those things that for me the tongue itself is so intertwined into the whole feeding story, into that baby's entire body. And so yeah, my perspective on it is like I've been trying to think of like how to make this really cool analogy for it, and I'm not quite there with it, but I have this beautiful comparison that I'm working on right now that can kind of like teach people what I'm trying to provide as information when it comes to the whole tongue tie thing. And that's where it's kind of one of those things that I like to encourage people to take their time with it, and that there's lots of other aspects that we can focus on and improve. Um, yeah.
I think you're pulling in some really key perspectives here on something that is treading into some pretty tricky territory and highly emotional too, because as a parent, when you're trying to navigate something as sensitive and as important as feeding, and then on top of it, parents have a very strong identity on feeding too. If your baby is thriving and growing, you're doing a great job. And if they're not, the feeling that we often take on is that we're not, that we're failing. And so when you add to that, that there's not a clear book or clear guideline that's going to give a very certain path with tongue tie, then, it is complicated. And I think about what you said about the darker and more heart-wrenching stories when tongue tie is playing a role, and perhaps the information that the parents are needing isn't getting to them in a way that allows them to make an empowered choice. I think it would be hard to put that all in one sentence.
Yes, thank you, Heather. I feel like it's something sometimes I sit back and I look at, all of the perspectives and all of the areas, and I just think, what's happening here? How can we make this better? Like I keep thinking, how can I make this better? How can I make this better? How can I, you know, give that information to everyone so that they have it and they can understand it from my perspective?
Mm,
Like, I don't know. Yeah,
yeah.
so I think I get that little spark when I have, when I'm in those situations that are really hard and really challenging for families because they weren't able to, have the whole picture looked at. It's
Mm,
like, having the chance to, you know, have the information can be so overwhelming that it's just a lot. So I'm trying to think of a way that I can simplify that just
mm.
and be able to present it to, you know, the world. Like just stick it on my website and just have it there so that maybe it'll find more people. But yeah, so tongue ties are a thing and they've always been a thing. So most times I'll be talking to people and I'll be like, your tongue looks like you have a little tongue
Yeah.
tie there, right? And it's something that I've learned a lot about, and I've learned from a lot of really incredibly smart people who are, seeing how, their choices and their information has been making such a great impact on feeding journeys, because it's just kind of like, let's take our time with this and let's look at it from more than one professional's perspective, or like it's complex and complicated, and
Well,
but
and
I
what you
think
said, you used the word integrative, which I always adore when we can take things from an integrative perspective. And I'll call it your reverence for just how amazing the tongue is. That whole dynamic muscle comes through clearly too. I think we don't give enough credit to how amazing tongues are in even letting feeding happen, let alone a whole slew of other amazing things that happen developmentally with the tongue. I'm going to have a new reverence for the tongue after this conversation. I'm going to appreciate just everything that it does.
yeah, the tongue is like, who knew, right? Like
Who knew?
this little tiny thing is just
Yeah,
like, yeah. So
yeah.
the tongue tie stuff is, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I just went all over the place here, there, and everywhere with it,
Well,
but
and
it's it's
it's a
hard.
big, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
big deep dive. We're actually going to have some more conversations on the podcast. I'll have a guest at some point in future episodes talking even more about the tongue and all that it does and some of the challenges that come up around airway and whatnot. But I wonder, especially when, on the heels of talking about tongue tie, which can feel like parents are just going into this deep, dark woods of confusion and not knowing which way to go. The other side to this in navigating this, again, is the information versus the tools we have to get through challenges. Do you have any supports or ideas that you encourage families to use or tools on the self-care end of things for getting through challenging feeding journeys that go beyond, the technical, the positioning or looking for tongue tie or, monitoring growth, that flip side of taking care of oneself during this journey?
Are you kind of saying ways that we refill our cups, like that sort
Yes,
of? Yeah.
exactly. That's a much easier way of saying it than I asked it. Yeah. How do we fill our cups?
Yeah, and that, like you said, is such an important piece of having that, that guidance within ourselves. If we can keep filling our own cups and feeling good about ourselves, and I talk about making sure we're, just basic things like taking those big deep breaths. One, two, three big deep breaths in a row can change your whole entire nervous system from being fight or flight to like, okay, I feel calmer now.
Yeah.
So I often will say to parents, take a deep breath and maybe take another one and relax your shoulders, stretch your neck out. I encourage people to do things like, if you have meditation, if that's something that you like doing, meditation can be really helpful.
Well,
Going
and
for
even just
walks.
you're describing these things, and I'm doing them as you're describing them. I'm taking a deeper breath, I'm dropping my shoulders, and I think, oh, yeah, we have these tools available to us all the time, but sometimes it takes someone else reminding us or cueing us to take advantage of them because we
Yep.
do get wrapped up in our heads, especially for parents that are going through a really challenging, frustrating, and scary time with feeding.
Yes, exactly. And you know what? I am right there with you all. So I'm doing all these things on a daily basis, and I'm trying to also so that I can be the best I can be when I come into a family's journey. My house is getting loud. I don't know if you can hear that. The
No,
kids
no,
are
it
like all
sounds.
yelling.
Oh, I know the feeling. I the one podcast that I recorded, I told my eldest to be very quiet, and it sounded like he was wearing work boots through the house, but it didn't come out on the podcast. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Hopefully that doesn't happen because the whole entire time we've been chatting, I think it's the living room above me is like stomping and jumping and stomping. I'm like,
it's like
oh,
subways running through under your house,
yes.
right?
And
Yeah,
then the
no,
door just opened over there and there was lots of screaming. So hopefully it doesn't pick up on here.
I didn't hear a thing. Didn't
Yeah,
hear a
but
thing.
I'm with you all. I'm right here in the thick of it of parenting and, trying to get through my days with taking breaks when I know I need one and, drinking
Mhm.
my water, eating my food. It's like those gentle reminders can be incredibly helpful in those moments where we're forgetting to just take a deep breath and just try not
Yeah.
to be so tense about it if we can, because the tension and the worry and all of that will make things feel harder. So we
Well,
can
and
get to that root cause of your feeding challenges, then, that can be a really big helpful part of, getting parents to relax. But that's what I'm here for.
yeah. Well, and I find I'm constantly telling parents, hang on to this strategy because it may be useful now, but it's going to be useful when your kiddo is 5 and 15 and beyond, because these are root strategies that it doesn't matter what the challenge is. When you can fill your cup in this way, it's going to be helpful.
Yeah.
I wonder, Karla, if you have on your radar something that we in general, not you and I on this conversation specifically, but society in general, are not talking enough about that you think should be more part of the conversation?
Ooh, this is a big question.
Mhm.
So, what's something that we could kind of talk more about? I would say if I could meet every single person and give them a solid piece of advice, it would be that whole ignore all of the information, ignore all of the advice, and just literally listen to your own body, listen to your own baby, and do the thing that feels good, whatever that is. And don't second guess it and don't make yourself feel like it's not the right choice. So embracing those opportunities to do the things that feel good for yourself. And I think making that, I mean, that conversation on its own is just, when it comes to, I don't know, that's a big question for my brain,
Hmm.
but it's like
It is a big
figuring,
question.
yeah, like we do have, for myself, I think there's been situations where, people will say things to me as a mother, the choices that I'm making, they aren't the choices that these people made. And I think just being able to talk more about that, those opportunities for people to kind of do what they want. And I don't know, it's like, Heather, I don't even know how to say it. It's just embrace what what feels good, what
Yeah.
feels good for
Well,
you.
I guess it's moving beyond the doing what we think we should be doing, because that's just the message that we've gotten, versus what works best for your baby and your family. And that can be really hard in today's age with all of the messages that we get through social media and advice from others. And it's almost relentless, right?
It's
And
so
so,
relentless. Yeah.
yeah, we get this idea of what is a good parent or a good way to do this. And it's, the more I listen to these stories from clients, or when I'm going through social media, and I think time and time again, it's like everybody's going to figure out their own journey. Every journey at a minute level is unique, and no one's going to have the same journey.
Exactly. Sometimes I think too, I'll go and I'll be with a person and I'll say something and they just look at me like, "What did you just say? Are you sure? Are you sure that's okay?"
Mm.
And I just think, "Oh my goodness, how have we lost touch with there's things that I'll say that I feel like this is like a basic piece of information, and then it has gone through the ringer and flung out into this whole like how did it go from this basic piece of information to like people being fearful of it, or
Mm.
people feeling like it's wrong, or I don't know. The biggest one I have, there's a few big ones, but the biggest one that I struggle with is the piece that says we shouldn't feed our babies to sleep, or that
Mm.
babies need a full feed. And that to me, I just think like how did those two things get so jumbled
Yes.
up? It's such a jumbled up message, and it's such a basic, those two things are so basic and so right at
Yes.
our fingertips and powerful, and like just they're magical. They're like a superpower. And
Yes. A
how did it,
superpower that we're denying exists
yeah,
because we're working so hard to separate feeding from sleep.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
There's so many little things like that that I encounter that I'm like, that's where I kind of like, if I had a piece of advice for everyone, it's please do the thing that feels good for you and your baby in the moment, because it's most likely the thing that
Yeah.
is right,
Well,
that is, yeah.
that's good advice. Good advice to carry. But it's a process to get to the point to feel okay listening to that inner voice and that inner wisdom, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, Karla, where can people find you? We were talking about social media, so I know that, people can find you there. Where can they find you if they're wanting to learn more about what you do or follow you on social?
Well, I've got my Instagram page. That one I'm probably the most active on, and it's called Be With Baby. I have a Facebook page if you are on Facebook, and then my website is very basic and simple and easy to navigate, just what a new mom needs. So I've got my website, which is Be With Baby. So always reach out if there's a need, because I'm always very, very happy to accommodate situations that, that are needing to be accommodated. And I know
And
my service is private, and um, I think that can sometimes create a bit of a barrier, and that's not what I'm about. And I'm very more than happy to, discuss if we can accommodate where needed. So that's another big thing that I do want to mention, but I also have lots and lots of colleagues and connections in the community where I'm able to provide that information for people who are reaching out and who do need assistance. I've got lots of information and connections for you. So Yeah.
And you serve all of Niagara,
Yep.
Ontario.
Niagara and
Right.
surrounding area. Yep.
Lovely. Well, Karla, I have so loved this conversation. I always like talking to you, so I'm glad we could do this. I would encourage anyone that is resonating with this call to find Karla on social. She has some beautiful, if you resonate with the more holistic attachment based content that I post, then you're going to like what Karla's posting too. It really resonates with me, which is why I wanted Karla on this episode. So thanks again, Karla. It's been great to spend this time with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Heather. And honestly, making my coffee earlier, I thought this is what I dreamed for 10 years ago was to be on a podcast with Heather talking about all
Yay.
of the things that we're learning and doing.
Well, there you go.
Yes.
Things sometimes take some time, but we get there in the end.
Yes.
Lovely. Well, take care, Karla. Bye for now.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.